This is apropos. One of the United States' most wanted fugitives. He was considered to be Mexico's most powerful cartel leader and the last of the drug lords acting in the brutal mold of the now imprisoned El Chapo. Gang members have responded with a wave of violence to the killing by the Mexican army of El Mencho on Sunday. At least 73 people died in the attempt to capture the cartel leader and during the unrest that followed. Cami Knight has the latest.
The morning after the killing of Mexico's most wanted cartel boss in a military operation, calm prevails, but people in the capital are on high alert.
Unfortunately, it's not the first time we're experiencing this, but this time it does seem a bit more worrying because there's no successor to these cartels. And, well, we hope that our president does something for us, protects us, because honestly, fear is palpable on the streets.
Nemesio Oseguera, better known as El Mencho, died in a government raid along with 6 other gang members. The operation triggered a violent response across Jalisco state, which spread to other parts of the country, cartel members blocking roads, setting fire to vehicles and killing more than 24 Mexican National Guard troops. President Claudia Sheinbaum now says peace and security are being upheld in Mexico and that all roadblocks have been cleared.
The people of Mexico should feel very proud of our armed forces and the security cabinet we have.
Meanwhile, the Defense Secretary praised US intelligence support for the operation and said El Mencho's location was found through a trusted associate of a romantic partner of the drug lord.
This romantic partner met up with El Mencho, and on the 21st she left the property. And information was obtained that El Mencho remained at this location.
The White House has also congratulated the Mexican military for the operation. Sheinbaum has been under mounting pressure to intensify her offensive against cartels blamed for producing and smuggling fentanyl across the US border.
Well, for more, we're joined by Valentin Pereda, an assistant professor at the School of Criminology at the University of Montreal, specialising in organised crime in Mexico specifically. Thanks for being with us on the programme, Valentin. So he had a $15 billion bounty on his head, Mexico's most wanted cartel leader killed over the weekend. Who exactly was El Mencho, and why has there been such a violent reaction to his death?
So, who was El Mencho? He was one of the most important organized crime group leaders in the Americas. Oftentimes, when we talk about the Mexican cartels, we refer to the more powerful, the most sophisticated of organized crime groups that operate in Mexico. And oftentimes we tend to think about the Sinaloa cartel because it is one of the better known groups, and it has a longer history than the Jalisco cartel. It also has had as its leaders some people who are better known to the media because their stories have been more mediatized, like El Chapo. But El Mencho is on par with El Chapo or Mayo Zambada, one of the most notorious, prominent, and dangerous leaders of the Mexican cartels.
And what kind of longer-term effect is his death likely to have on the security landscape in Mexico?
Well, criminologists have studied the impact of beheading organized crime groups and the effects it has on violence. And the results show that killing or capturing the leaders of organized crime groups, such as the Mexican cartels, actually doesn't do much for increasing security, and in fact does the opposite. So in the midterm and the long term, killing the heads of organized crime groups actually increases levels of violence. And it is not really hard to see why, right? So when you kill the leader of an organized crime group, you create power vacuums. So the group splinters into factions that are often rival factions, and they start fighting each other. Also, rival groups see this as an opportunity to move in against the group that has been weakened by the capture or killing of the leader, and then that also creates violence. And then oftentimes these leaders, even though they are very dangerous, they are very violent, they also create some sense of stability, and they do allow the groups that they lead to partake in organized crime ventures that are more sophisticated, such as, for instance, transnational drug trafficking. When these leaders are removed, and their contacts disappear oftentimes with them, what remains actually regresses into more less sophisticated and more violent practices such as kidnappings, extortions, and etc.
So what kind of strategies then are the most successful in the longer term as the government fights these organised crime groups? And how successful has the president been in doing that since she came to power?
Well, that's a very complex question. In order to dismantle organized crime groups, one of the best approaches is to actually implement a more comprehensive strategy that also aims at reducing the incentives for these groups to exist in the first place, right? So, for instance, one way of reducing the power of the Mexican cartels would be, on the first hand, to reduce demand for illicit drugs, which is something that would require a combined effort from the US, Mexico, and other countries in the Americas and even Europe. And in the case of Mexico, one of the key elements that gives the cartels their power is their access, almost untapped access to American-made weapons. So Mexican cartels know that the U.S. is one of the world's largest producers of firearms, and that many states in the U.S. are actually quite open with and quite lax with the regulations with regards to the purchase of firearms. So Mexican cartels use their money to acquire firearms in the U.S. and then to use them to fight each other and also to fight against the Mexican government. So removing the power from the cartels would also entail removing that capacity to purchase firearms so easily.
And you mentioned the US. How much of an influence did Washington play here? We're being told that American forces weren't involved, but that intelligence was provided to Mexico by the United States.
So it's important to take into consideration the current context in which President Donald Trump has, for the past months, been threatening with military intervention, U.S. military intervention in Mexico, if the Mexican government doesn't acquiesce to some of the U.S.'s demands regarding, for instance, the fight against undocumented migrants, the fight against drug trafficking, and also other issues related, for instance, to international trade. So Donald Trump has been using this card, threatening military intervention, and that has put indeed a lot of pressure on Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and her administration to crack down on organized crime groups in Mexico. And she has actually tried to do as much as possible to kind of try to navigate this delicate situation with the U.S. administration and to show that the Mexican government is actually delivering on its promises to fight against organized crime. So Sheinbaum has a record of extraditions lately. She has extradited a record number of Mexican prisoners into the U.S. in order for them to be prosecuted in U.S. courts. A few weeks ago, she also delivered Ryan Wedding, one of the FBI's top wanted fugitives, and now she's showing that she is also going after the leaders of the most powerful organized crime groups.
Yeah, and some are suggesting that the killing of this cartel leader could give the Mexican government an advantage in its dealings with the Trump administration. Would you share that view?
I mean, not necessarily, because the U.S. administration is so unpredictable. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe the U.S. administration will use this opportunity to say, look at the chaos in Mexico right now. Like, it just goes to show that the country is unmanageable and that the only solution is to actually intervene directly in order to crack down on the cartels. So if we talk strictly about the relationship between law enforcement institutions in the U.S. and Mexico, yes, we could say that this will be a good show of solidarity and of cooperation between Mexican and U.S. law enforcement organizations. However, if we talk about the political relationship, then the killing of El Mencho doesn't necessarily predict anything.
And in terms of how people are going to be feeling in Mexico, we heard earlier from our correspondent there, the situation is under control. The government has managed to defuse some of these tensions, but people are still very afraid about what might happen next.
I mean, I think it's important to consider that Mexico is a pretty big country, right? So, for instance, at the beginning of the segment, you showed some images of Mexico City. I'm actually from Mexico City, and I can tell that, like, for instance, my family who's there right now, they don't necessarily feel threatened because this operation took place hundreds of kilometers away from the capital, right? So in the capital, no one's actually seeing any kinds of like violence or fires or blockades or anything like that. And actually, the capital has always been kind of like this bubble where you rarely see these kind of incidents. However, people in the cities where this cartel, the Jalisco cartel, is powerful, they are actually living in a pretty they're going through pretty difficult moments. They're not able to go out. They're sheltering in place. People that I know who live in Guadalajara, for instance, they tell me, like, we can't even go out because the grocery store next door has just been like burned by some criminals, and then 2 blocks down from here there's a roadblock, and like who knows who's handling it. So people there are just actually sheltering in place, and they are actually quite afraid right now.
Valentin, thanks so much for joining us with all of that analysis and that information about how people are responding in Mexico. That is Valentin Pereda, an assistant professor at the School of Criminology at the University of Montreal. Thanks so much for your time.